Welcome back to Bible Bites. I'm Gabe. Thank you for joining. Today we're going to talk about John chapter 6. And this chapter takes a little bit of a departure from the story structure of the previous chapters, but it also draws some parallels, particularly from John chapter 4, where Jesus meets a Samaritan woman at the well. So the other part where it's different is in the first 5 chapters, John breaks down each chapter into effectively 2 different stories. This time, we're going to go into 3 different stories. One is short and in the middle, but it's still pretty important and plays pretty prevalently throughout the entire New Testament, especially in the first 4 books. So let's get into it. So the first part is the story of Jesus feeding the masses with the loaves of bread and the fish. So what happens is Jesus comes up on shore by the lake. He goes up on the hill and he begins to preach. And what happens is a large group of people come to listen to him preach and to sit around him and to kind of gather all the information that he's providing to them. And there's an opportunity, obviously, to gain followers and to spread his word. The problem he runs into is it's a pretty large crowd, about 5,000 men, as the book calls it. And if the men are traveling with their wives and children, it can balloon up by magnitudes to that. So it's at least 5,000, but it could be as high as 10 or 15 or even more. And Jesus says, all these people milling around, they're going to be here for a while because we've got a lot to say and a lot they need to hear. Let's feed them. His disciples come up and said, well, we've got this boy. He's got 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, but that's not nearly enough to feed all these people. Jesus says, no problem. I got to tell everybody to sit down. I'll take care of it. And through his power, he multiplies that bread and the fish, and everybody gets something to eat. Everybody is fed. And he tells his disciples, when everybody's done eating, gather up all the leftovers, and the leftovers are enough to fill 12 baskets worth of bread and fish. And so what we see here is that on a spiritual level, God is feeding everybody's soul by telling them the truth of what they need to hear about God's power, why Jesus was sent, and the intention of uh, Jesus's ministry on the planet. And in physical terms, if you want to call it a metaphor or just a way of symbolically representing what that's doing, is he's feeding everybody with real food that sprang through his power and sprang up through his connection to God. And so you get this miraculous event, this miracle that comes about simply because Jesus said, this is an important venue. This is important that I connect with all these people. Let's feed their spirit and feed their body. Now, during the night, at the end of this miraculous event, the disciples decide to head to the other side of the lake by which they were preaching to go to Capernaum. But they left without Jesus because Jesus was off doing something else. Jesus decides, okay, I'm going to catch up to them, but they're already in the boat and they're a couple miles, I should say about 3 to 3.5 miles out from shore. And even though it's dark and it's windy and maybe the waves are kicking up a little bit, Jesus goes out to the boat where they were crossing the lake and he's walking on the water. The disciples see him and they start to freak out and they get very terrified and like, what's going on here? And not in this particular book, but in other books, they refer to it or are afraid that Jesus, who they see walking on the water from a distance, might be a ghost or some kind of spirit. And Jesus says, don't worry, calm down. It's just me. And then he catches up to them. They get in the boat and they all go over to Capernaum together. So in that sense, we're seeing another miracle. Now at the time, it's only seen by the disciples. So it's captured here, but there are plenty of object lessons that will come to light in other books of the Bible about that particular event and what it means to, from just to keep your eyes on Jesus and what that means from a power perspective and God's control over everything, including nature. So that one isn't, dwelled on too much in this particular book, but it is important. And then we get to the third story, which is when he gets to the other side of the lake and then into Capernaum, and he begins to preach. Now, what happens there is Jesus starts delivering a message about bread and feeding yourself, and in this case, feeding your soul. Whereas that physical bread feeds your body, spiritual bread, the bread that he provides, uh, starting to kind of form that foundation of drinking the blood and eating the body of Christ, is now setting a foundation for feeding your soul, and how feeding the soul from the right source, which is Jesus as the Son of God, is an eternal act where once you're fed forever. And now what's happening is when he's trying to deliver this message, he's trying to explain it to people. It's like, if you eat my body and drink my blood, you'll have everlasting life. People are really confused by it because they're thinking in literal physical terms. Am I literally drinking your blood? Am I literally eating your body? And what they're struggling with, a lot of the believers who are hearing this message are struggling with, is trying to make the connection between spiritual feeding and spiritual drinking and the physical act of eating and drinking. So in the same way that God uses the parallel of drinking water, as he did in John chapter 4 when he met the Samaritan woman at the well. He was asking for water to feed the body, and then when he proved to him who he was, then he started preaching the message of giving the living water, or the spiritual water that satisfies your thirst forever. Here he's doing the same thing. He sets up a scenario where he feeds people with physical bread, literal bread, and then he transitions that act into a message about feeding your soul with spiritual bread. And that spiritual bread comes through uh, faith and belief in Jesus Christ, his blood and his body being sacrificed for them to feed them and to give them eternal life and salvation. So what as a side effect of that message, because people were struggling or to grasp the connection between feeding the body and feeding the spirit, people were getting really ridiculously confused, and they couldn't get it. Like, wait a minute, I'm supposed to eat you? And they said, no, you're not supposed to eat me. I'm talking about feeding your spirit. Well, how do we do that? Well, you have to drink my blood and eat my body. And they couldn't get it. They couldn't grasp it. He was talking spiritually and almost at a metaphorical level. And so what happened was, by making that message, I won't say it was unnecessarily complicated, but it was complicated enough that people who couldn't think perceptually were getting confused and lost, and they drifted away. And so this was a sort of a sermon that tested people's ability to grasp the spiritual beyond the physical. And it was sort of I won't say a culling, but it basically separated out the people who were just following him just to get something out of it, versus people who had a deep seated hunger to actually learn and to kind of internalize the spiritual aspects of Jesus's message. And the disciples approached him as like, this is hard and confusing. I don't think I'm getting it, and some people are getting it. And he's like, that's okay. It's supposed to be, well, I won't say it's supposed to be hard, but it was supposed to be clear and truthful. And it was meant to sort of weed out the people who were just here and following me because they're getting something out of it. Only true believers who are hungry for the knowledge that I'm teaching them are really going to get something out of this message. And that's going to set the tone for many of the messages that Jesus will deliver on past this, which is, sometimes he talks he uses object lessons and metaphors, and he uses fables and sort of object lesson stories to kind of make the message at different levels and provide some subtext. But here he's giving you the straight scoop, and the straight scoop is not easy to grasp if you're not open to hearing it. And he's really saying, well, this is what I have to do for now, because I've got so many believers that are just following me for what they can get out of it, and I need to kind of shoo some of them away that aren't really open to hearing what I have to say. So a little bit of a departure, but there are some parallels. So we have 3 stories instead of 2, which has been the model so far. And then, so that's different. And then the stories that are similar, for example, using bread in the physical sense, and then using bread as the foundation for a sermon, parallels what happened in John chapter 4 with the Samaritan woman, where he wanted water in the physical sense, and then use that as a foundation for a sermon talking about living water. So you can see some, I won't say repetition, but at least some consistency about how the message is coming across, and and Jesus' model for delivering that message, by starting with the physical, starting with the healing, starting what matters to the body, and then equating that to how that works for the spirit and the soul. So I hope this is helpful. I hope you're getting something out of it, and I hope whoever hears this gets something out of it. I really, truly do. So thank you for joining. If you have a request for a Bible, you see up on the screen, I've got Bible Gateway up. It's free to anybody who wants it. If you'd rather have a physical Bible, there's an email address down in the description. Please send us an email. We'll see what we can do to help you out. Also, if you have any prayer requests, there's an email in the address in the description. Send us your prayer request. We'll be happy to pray with you. And that's it. Thank you very much. I'm Gabe Hernandez. This is Bible Bites. You have a good day. You have a blessed day, and I will talk to you soon.